Okay, we're on.
Okay. FreeBSD has been called the unknown giant of the open source world. It's full-featured, robust, and stable. Still, it lurks in the shadows of its younger cousin Linux. This month at Newlug, Michael Spear, feel free to wave, Michael Spear will be giving a presentation about the basics of FreeBSD, how to install, manage, and secure a FreeBSD system. Michael Spear is a computer science student at UWGB. He's been playing with FreeBSD for a couple years now and suffers from a love-hate relationship with the Unix-like system. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Spear.
All right, so let's start this. There's the first half of the BSD license. Okay. So,
There's the...
yep, there's BSD. All right, so first I'm going to go with, I'm going to give you guys a history lesson. Just to warn you, it's not fully accurate. I did some digging on the history, and there's people with like 5-hour seminars about what the history of BSD is. So I'm just giving you one so that you kind of understand what it is. I'm going to look at differences from Linux, install FreeBSD, then we're going to get into the actual important stuff. So we're going to talk about package management and updating the system, and we're going to talk about some things that I found about FreeBSD around the internet that I don't think are true, personally. We're going to build a custom kernel, and I'm going to secure the system, lock it down, and then I'm going to give you a warning of things that have come back to bite me over time that you should avoid because you'd be tempted to otherwise. Okay, so history. Long time ago, some guy invented Unix. AT&T owned it for whatever reason. Then they tried to sell it, and the judge said they couldn't for some reason. So AT&T let the University of California, Berkeley, software development, BSD, work on it for a while, and then for some reason they could sell it, and Berkeley was like, no, it's our stuff, and they fought about it for a long time in court. During this time, some guy made Linux for some other reason, and that became popular, and then BSD won and later called itself FreeBSD for some reason. Any questions?
Cool. That's just great.
I like the nickel version because there's probably 5 things wrong with it, but it's right.
Okay, so just a quick note, some differences before I start. Home in Linux is user home in FreeBSD. When you install a package wherever in Linux, wherever it goes, just add user local to the path, and that's where it is. Just BSD license, not GPL. There are no run levels, which is actually quite nice. It uses CVS to get source code of all kinds, and it kind of uses source as a package manager. Therefore, I like to say it uses CVS as a package manager, even though it technically doesn't. All right, and things like USB mice and sound are not enabled by default. They do require some configuration and custom kernel building. Here's the other half of the FreeBSD license. It's basically simple. It just says don't say you wrote this if you didn't. Don't use our writing it as an endorsement of whatever you're doing with it. And don't blame us if it doesn't work. Simple enough.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Completely derail us, but Mac OS X has some sort of a BSD base, right?
Yes.
Do you want to address that now or later?
Well, I can take that. It's not really, it's very different from FreeBSD. But from my understanding is there was some next step OS which was based on FreeBSD, and then Apple bought Next Step and they put in their own stuff on top of it. And if you go into the Apple terminal, you can definitely see it's Unix-like. But if you know FreeBSD well, you're not going to be able to find your way through OS X or Darwin because everything's in different places. They have different programs for things. So unless you're going to do basic shell work like ls or cat or whatever, it's not going to be very useful. Okay. So these are, and again, just kind of getting some stuff out of the way. Some places that you'll find you're going to more often than not. User share examples. One thing that is nice is there's a lot of files that have to config, and there's nothing in there. But in the user shares examples, and this particular one I use the CVS up file, they have what they think you might want to do. And it's so you can go there, look, see how the syntax looks, and customize from there. User local ect, that's where all your config files are for software that you install. Bin is where the binaries are. This is the location here of your kernel configuration file, which you're gonna be working with when you build your custom. They actually have user source. They have the entire system in source code there for you to build and make changes to, and it's one method of updating. And then this is, instead of run levels, they have one file, which is rc.config, and it's either something's on or it's not when you turn on the computer. Fairly straightforward. All right. Oh, and by the way, before I go on, you often see that 8 I put behind there. I'm sure plenty of you guys if you've been around for a while probably already know this, but I could not figure this out for the longest time. The 8 refers to the section of the man page that the context of whatever it's telling you is in. Anyway.
There's like 1 through 9, isn't there, or something like that?
Yeah. Anyway, I just never could figure out what exactly that was. All right, and so then just going through basically a standard install should be fine. You probably heard there's ZSH in FreeBSD, and there technically is. And they're working on building ZFS, not ZSH, sorry, ZFS into the core of FreeBSD, and they don't know when that's going to happen. I've seen it talked about. For right now, though, you cannot install FreeBSD on ZFS. After you install FreeBSD, you can install ZFS and then create and use ZFS disks somewhere else, but the core system is not going to sit on ZFS. And one other warning I'll give you during the install process is your root folder. You might want to give it a little bit more space than the auto assign option if you're going to be using a lot of the source code and custom compiling, because you might run out of space.
Is that ZFS, is that
from Solaris?
Yeah.
That Solaris did?
Yeah.
Oh, it is available now?
It is available, and you can install it, you can get it to work. You can't do it from the from installation. So it's kind of like you can get Windows to read ext3, but you can't install Windows on an ext3 system.
Oh.
I think. Can you?
It's similar to that. I think, yeah.
So you have to get your BSD up and running, and then
right, and then it's a port that you have to install. And I'll get into the difference between ports and the core, because it's kind of one of the weirder concepts they have.
But Linux, can Linux do the same then with ZFS?
I don't believe so. They're trying to make something that's a clone of it called Better file system or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, BTRFS.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
Better file system.
Yes, Oracle's working on that to put it in the Linux kernel.
Makes you nervous, eh?
Yeah. And it's coming to a store near you for $59.95.
Okay, so with most with your Linuxes, you have one package management tool, and then that's it. You update everything or you don't. FreeBSD, there's 2 completely separate file management systems. There's core and there's ports. And core is basically what comes with the system. It's a shell you can SSH into is basically what you're going to get with core. Think about it that way. And then ports is everything else that you want to install. And I can show you. Got this SSH session going on. My friend Justin gave me a VM. Okay, so right there is this is the ports collection folder. There's a list of all the categories they have, and I'll just go into that up so you can see it. And then you can pick whatever you want, and then you get into the folder that the port that you want, and you just have to make it. And now ports is going to download the vanilla source code for whatever this is, and it's going to apply its specialty make file to it, and it's going to build it somewhat automatically. It might ask you a few options about the config that you want. So anyway, those two things, the core and ports, are completely separate, have nothing to do with each other. That's why everything from ports is installed to that user local whatever. And so, and it's kind of a hard thing for me to get my head wrapped around it at first anyways. Anyway, so with ports, I'm going to give you the warning that when you update FreeBSD core to something else, you don't have to recompile all of ports. However, if you do a major update like 8 to 9, then you're going to want to go through and recompile all of ports, which will take, you have a lot, forever. All right. And like I was talking about earlier with ZFS, ZFS is in that ports tree, and if you build it and compile it, install it, you can then manipulate, create ZFS files. However, you can't put the FreeBSD system on ZFS itself. And that.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
What is the FreeBSD system? I guess the core.
UFS.
What is it? Oh, UFS.
Yeah,
Yeah.
UFS.
Okay. So you're going to have to be running two file systems. Is there any problem with that?
No. It's just a different disk. You can do whatever you want with them. But that's just the word of warning, because that's something that people seem to be most excited about. And again, that's probably going to change in the near future, or
Change.
distant future, either way.
How? In the sense that maybe the core can be ZFS instead of UFS?
Yeah, or they'll at least have the option to install. And this
okay,
is a
right.
period I plan to have little questions about what we got so far, so in the meantime, you can just look at video of stuff happening. So anyway.
I have a question about, I used FreeNAS for a while, which was based on FreeBSD.
Yes.
Or FreeBSD. What is the relationship between the two? Is it just a guy who basically decided to use FreeBSD as the base, or is there an official link between the developers?
Okay. So FreeBSD has some security stuff, and I'll get into the details of that later, but it's kind of a pain to set up. But you can make FreeBSD do basically be a router or a server or whatever. So FreeNAS basically said that we need a router firewall type thing, and that's about all we need. So they made FreeBSD, and they made it with the files and the configuration, all that set up to do that function, and that's it.
Okay.
How many architectures does it run on, like the ARM chip?
Are we talking about FreeNAS?
Yeah, FreeBSD. Like Linux runs on ARM. It runs on.
Yeah.
It runs on like almost every processor.
I really don't know. It runs on
Intel.
Yeah, it runs on the Intel. It runs on the 64-bit, and I don't have any other hardware, so I've not come across an issue with anything else in those two.
I've got the Wikipedia page up on it, and it runs on NEC, Sun, Spark, Itanium, PowerPC, ARM, MIPS, Xbox.
Oh yeah, Xbox.
But it doesn't run on toasters? Oh,
GEC
That's NetBSD.
oh yeah.
I have a question. It's my understanding that the newest version of the OS for Mac is based around this system.
It's a distant relationship, but yeah.
So that's what I use as a Mac. So I happen to notice you're talking about ports, and
Yeah.
I was just starting to get myself acquainted with how to, as you say, update packages and do that sort of thing in Mac. But so I was reading about ports, and I'm interested in what you were talking about ports. So it seemed to me it's sort of similar in that respect.
Yeah, I'm not sure about. I didn't think there was a ports. I know that there's a software update tool.
Well, there's a reading thing on how to install Paradox database on my system. And
Okay.
it said you had to use ports.
Okay.
I don't know if it's the same thing or just a different name. That's some name. The other question I was going to ask is, I'd like to understand history. Is this basically Berkeley Unix?
It's where it derived from, and that's why it still has the name BSD. And it went through a couple of different phases where they changed stuff around and all that. And then eventually, one version was they called FreeBSD became immensely popular, and that's been around since I'm not even sure, like the early '90s, but I'm not exactly sure of the date.
Okay.
But
Well,
Maybe.
how do you spell freeness?
FreeNAS?
Free NAS.
Oh,
yeah,
free
free
NAS.
NAS.
Okay.
In-
It's in essence, it's one of the network attached storage appliance distributions like OpenFiler and FreeNAS have been seen as competitors. Basically, stuff you can put on, things that you could put on, hook up to a very large amount of storage, and have accessible via a relatively simplified interface. I used FreeNAS for a while at home, just as basically a network attached storage and plus a little bit more. I eventually decided on slightly different things because I wasn't using the very large amount of things that it was providing to me, and I needed a couple things that it wasn't. So I eventually decided that it wasn't the best decision, or what wasn't the best tool for me, even though it was a very good system.
What is make world in? I have heard of worlds in
Yeah.
in
That-
FreeBSD.
that is something that should not be done. It's the way that you update the. It's kind of, I guess it would be the preferred way for whatever reason to update FreeBSD is you get the source code and then you make build world, make install world, and then you
Oh.
install the core system.
It's like Gentoo.
Right.
It's like doing
And-
a merge world every night.
Yeah, and that's incredibly annoying and time consuming. The kernel, you'd have a reason to do that, and so I go through it. But it is a lot of steps and a lot of time and frustration to update FreeBSD when they have the binary option available so quickly and simply. But if you were going to say, if you wanted to make it custom where it didn't have certain things in it to make it smaller, make it fit on something somewhere that was tiny, then it would make sense to do a build world. But for simple updates, it's kind of dumb.
You mentioned FreeNAS and like routers.
Yeah,
They're-
actually, I'll hold that one because I do cover security at the end of it, so now I might come across some stuff there. Anything else about what I've? Okay. Right. So now with ports, this is one of those things where it's going to get kind of confusing because the word ports can be used many different ways. Well, it is used many different ways. All right. So there's a binary ports that you can install because it's in the ports collection, which is everything in that user ports folder. You'll get sick of the word ports by the end of this presentation, I can tell. Anyway, so there's the code if you want to do binary. You just as root, go package add R for remote, so it'll connect to the FreeBSD servers, or if you have the file locally, you don't have to have the R, and then whatever the name of the package is, and it goes out and it fetches the binary and its dependencies and installs them. And it's really quite quick. They're often out of date, but...
What did you say the R was?
What?
The R.
The R is for remote, so it'll go to the server, download that package, and then install it, instead of just going and straight installing it. For source, which is what you saw me doing earlier, you just go to the directory of the port you want to make, and you just run the command make install clean. There are a couple of other options you can do, like make package clean will build the port and make a binary package for you, for example. But the vast majority of the time, just a make install clean will do the job. And word of warning though, is if you don't run a make config, which is it'll go through what you want to install and prompt up all the config menus that will pop up beforehand, you might find that it'll take several hours to install something, and so you leave for work, and then you find 15 minutes after you left, a configuration menu popped up, and it spent the whole day not compiling because you have to say accept defaults or whatever. So that's a word of warning. Okay, for binary, for the core, this is just a simple command. It's FreeBSD update, and it's fetch will download the binary updates and install them. And if you want to upgrade to a different distribution, it's FreeBSD update upgrade R for the fetch remotely, and then the tag for whatever the release is. This would be release candidate 2.
Is remotely your own system, or it's out on the web?
It's the FreeBSD's server.
Okay.
You can change it to whatever you want, but by default it's just set to FreeBSD. Right, and for source, this is where that build world comes in. Is you do a CS up, which is what's going to grab all of your source code, and you have to kind of write your own sub file. I'll show you guys how to do that. And then you go to the source folder and you make build world, and then you do a make install world. And, okay. So, right now, just to give you guys an idea what the different tags are. 8.1 release, that's, oh, that sounds like. So we have 8 stable, which is a development branch. And that means, so right now we're in the 8 series. We had 8.0, now we're 8.1. In the 6 more months or so, we'll have 8.2. And so 8 is the development for that. And it's pretty much, for the most part, stable. You don't get binary updates with it, though. You do have to do the make build world stuff. But it just follows the development for the 8. Now 9 current is, that's the bleeding edge stuff that will likely break. It's where people are going to try out new things for what's going to come up with the next version of FreeBSD. And when they get something good and they like it in current, they might backport it down to stable, and then that might eventually find its way into a release. But we're going to ask you for a tag, which it sometimes will when you're doing stuff. There's some of the tags look like. Okay, there we go. Okay, now enough about packages. Let's go with these are some things you start looking around the internet, you might see this. And this is not a list I pulled from, this is some things that I just noticed I don't think are accurate. So you're going to see that FreeBSD is well documented. People will brag about this. And it is fairly well documented, I will have to say that. And there's a lot of free stuff. Right here, these are some PDFs. What they like to do is they like to release entire books. Like this, for example, is the printed version of the first half of the FreeBSD handbook. And they print it off, and it's nice to look at. They have the ports handbook if you want to build your own ports. They have a developer handbook if you want to develop for it. And that's all in the source code. It's also generally installed on your system itself. However, everyone has that. Maybe not in one central place, but if you get out of Google and you look for a problem you have in Fedora or Ubuntu, you'll find its solution. So I'm going to say it's not anything special. It's essentially developed. I don't fully understand what this means. There's a CVS area that has the source code for the core of the system, which doesn't have much software in it. And in that core, it's all in one CVS repository. They have source code from projects like OpenSSH and PF that they didn't create. But that's one thing they'll keep saying is it's centrally developed as well.
It means that.
Yeah.
You just,
Yeah, that's what it means. And well, every Linux distro has a place where you can download all the source too. Ports is awesome. No, it is not. It's one reaffirming themes you're going to find. It takes forever, and sometimes it breaks. And when it breaks, good luck fixing it. Yeah. Right, and FreeBSD has ZFS support. I think we covered that. It does, but not quite. And they got FreeBSD as a lightweight system. Partial truth. If you go and you look at top or whatever in FreeBSD, you're going to see it's using up a lot of your system resources. Partially that's by design because it will flood your resources as much as it can and then use it for disk caching or whatever. So it'll look like it's using more of your resources than it really is. Where I'm saying it's not lightweight, at least by default, is it's a rather large distribution. They have DVDs of it if you want to get all the source code and all that kind of stuff with it, but you kind of need to do certain things. So it's not like a puppy Linux, which will fit on a little disk. There's some girth to it, and I kind of cover that.
So you can't make a nano.
You can make your own
FreeBSD that.
Oh, you can. That you can do. Like if you do that make build world stuff, you can strip out all kinds of stuff. You can and make the core smaller. You can include only the certain packages that you want, and you can make it really small.
Can you do it in a way that you don't break everything?
Well, FreeNAS is one of the implementations of that, because I know FreeNAS, I think it takes up like,
Okay.
I think you can put it on a 128 or at least a 512 meg USB key,
So
and have that, and then you can have your whatever device, like a mini ITX device, booting off the 512 meg USB key, and then you can have like, 8 2 terabyte drives hooked up to it, and
Right.
that 512 meg USB key is running all of the underlying stuff for those hard drives. So
Right.
it can be made small. The question is, once you make it small, then what?
it's kind of limited and specific, but there are some people out there who have already
Yeah.
done that. You can pick, depending on what you want or need, you can look at what the nano, the small versions of BSD that are the distros of it, and just use that. Right.
Yes.
Okay. There's enough. Okay. The community is big enough that enough people have made some small ones that would be
Well, there's not
usable.
too many of them. It's not as big as the Linux community, so you're going to be doing a lot of stuff yourself, but you can. And there is some stuff out there. There's a new project, Ghost BSD, that just started. That looks kind of interesting. That's like a desktop version of FreeBSD, for example. Well, anyway.
Okay.
Kind of like Nixenta was the desktop-ready version of Solaris.
Yes. Okay, a couple of things I want to complain about ports a little bit more. There's a thing called port snap, which is how you update ports. Is you go out, you download a snapshot of what the ports tree looks like on the FreeBSD servers, and it compares with what you have, and it'll update all of them. And so basically, you have every single thing in the ports tree, and there's like tens of thousands of packages in there. And you have a make file for all of them and links to where you can download the source code for it, should you ever want to go there and install it. Which means every time you update source, every time you update ports, which would be something like apt-get update in Debian, you're going to waste about 62 megabytes of bandwidth, if that ever becomes an issue. And also, another thing was about FreeBSD documentation, I forgot to say. One of my major complaints about it is, so they have all this documentation, but if you want to, say, get something like GNOME running on your FreeBSD, GNOME is not considered part of FreeBSD, it's a port, so you have to go to GNOME for help with GNOME problems on FreeBSD.
And that GNOME is really happy to provide you FreeBSD support for their window manager.
Well,
They are.
well, FreeBSD, it's meant to be a server, and the developers will openly say that. It's not anything else that's... there's a side-by-side. I installed 2 things, binary source. I think you all know this.
How about, the Sun, Oracle, Java EE Enterprise Edition server?
Yeah.
Are they using that on FreeBSD?
I'm not sure. I know
That
they
would-
have Java.
That would be a big deal. You say that FreeBSD is more as a server than
Yeah.
a desktop or nano, small, mini version. I'd be interested to hear.
Okay. We can check in the ports tree after this, but
Okay.
I'm not sure about that one. Okay, so we're going to now talk about how to build your own custom kernel, which actually is somewhat useful. So generally speaking, when you install FreeBSD, there's 2 kernel configuration packages. One's just generic, which is what you're going to use on computers, and there's actually an Xbox configuration file. It comes with it if you wanted to build a kernel to run on your Xbox.
Which is cool.
Yeah. Other than that, kind of, you're going to have to build your own if you want to do anything that they didn't include in generic, or if you want to strip out things that were in generic that you don't actually need. So the first step is you have to copy generic over to something else. So I just picked newlug. So that's what the code looks like, if anyone would be so inclined. All right. And then you got to open up a text editor, and you're going to open up the file. That you made a copy of generic, so you don't want to actually modify generic itself, because if you screw it up, you want a place to go back to. So let me just... okay, so here is a copy of the kernel configuration sheet. The first thing you're going to do is you want to change this here to whatever you named it. So this one I called Sphere kernel. It's one of the earlier ones I made. And so in the ident, you change it here to match whatever it is you named the file itself. You're going to go through here, and it's just going to be a list of just options and devices that it has support for. Think of the kernel as just a stack to hold drivers. What you're going to do is you're going to find, and I only did this sparingly on here, as you can see, but if you say don't have Intel integrated RAID card on your system, you just would want to comment it out if you don't need it. And if you go all the way to the bottom here, and we're going to talk about this later, but this bottom section here was actually added. It is not part of the generic kernel, but this is to get some kernel level workings for PF, which is a firewall, which we're going to talk about later. All right, then you're going to change over to the source directory, and you're going to run the make build kernel config equals, and then the name of whatever your kernel config file is. Then it's going to build the kernel from scratch, the whole thing, assuming that you have the source code in your source folder and you've been updating it with the csub, which I now realize I probably should have talked about before this, so my bad. Anyway, then after that you're going to install the kernel, and you reboot into the good kernel. A couple of words of warning is, one, obviously you're going to want to make a copy of the working kernel somewhere else in case you screw things up and the kernel you built doesn't work right. And I better show you csub. It's over here. Okay. So, okay, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay. So I made I have my custom sub file, which I used as a template. Okay, so in the user share example CVS up, I used the standard sub file as a template. But all of these different templates there, they're differently for whatever it is you're going to do. So anyway, and the one thing you're going to want to do so in your sub file, it's going to say host equals change this .freebsd.org. You're going to want to change that. And I just always use cvs up .15. There's no reason I picked 15 other than why not. So anyway. CS up, custom file, and now it's going to connect and it's going to download the source. And you better be root to do this, by the way. Okay. So security. There's a couple of interesting features that FreeBSD has for security-wise. There's something called jail, which is kind of a combination between a virtual machine and a change root. It will install a version of FreeBSD inside of itself. And to the host system, it looks like it's just part of the file system. But if you go inside of the jail, it'll look like it's a full FreeBSD system in and of itself.
They mentioned something like this in that.
Solaris.
Yeah, zones or.
Solaris has
Containers.
Yeah.
Containers or zones, yeah. It was one base started before the other, or they just kind of.
I'm not sure when Solaris started doing this, so I'm not sure about which one came first.
Too bad. Who did that? Solaris.
I did.
He's not here. We pushed him.
But he may be watching online.
Ah.
Hi, Ivan.
Is he a word?
I don't know. I'll make sure to send it to him, seeing as we gave him a shout out.
Okay.
Shout out to him.
So anyway, you can put jails wherever you want. I put them in user jails, and so then I have this jail cell because I'm so funny. And if I go inside of cell and I do that, it looks just like it was a root of FreeBSD, and you can connect to it. Let's see, jail admin console cell sudo.
There you go.
Don't you have like the history?
What?
Doesn't he have a
He's
history?
he's asking about command history, whether you can push up and down and get the commands that you used to type.
I can.
Oh, you can't do that. Just like in Linux, I use it all the time.
Yeah. Right now I'm actually running ZSH, which is my favorite shell. By the way, if you're not using ZSH, you're wrong. So it works just the same as it does in Linux. I have the history file and all that. And you can go through. But anyway, so right now I've logged into my jail cell, and as you can see, it just looks like the ordinary login, present working directory, root, and
that jail can get like its own IP and run
yes.
simultaneously.
Well, not only can it must have its own IP, and if anything else has the jail same IP, it'll fail to work and make you angry.
Well, isn't KVM the kernel virtual module in Linux the same as like?
Not quite
you're
the
talking
same,
about?
but it's
Because it's a
another
virtual
attempt
machine,
to do the
but
same
it's,
solution.
but it's like a jail, but it's
Yeah.
its own virtual machine.
Kind of the advanced
virtual hardware. It's
Yeah.
like just installing itself in itself.
Yeah, which is kind of cool.
And the thing about jails, the way it works is they have almost no overhead. Where because it uses essentially the same libraries, and it'll share all those kind of resources. I don't know how they do that, but they do it. And what will happen is someone will, if I could set this up, this jail cell, if I didn't tell someone that this was a jail, the only way they could really figure out that it was a jail if I set it up right so that they could have internet going through it and all that, is if they tried to create a jail. Because you can't create a jail inside of a jail.
Oh.
So that's like kind of one of the very few ways you'd be able to tell that you are in fact in a jail. But for now, let's get out of
Who
that.
am I?
I've heard of somebody making a transparent, like FreeBSD making it transparent so you don't even know that it's there.
Well, it's close. Because how often do you create jails? So, other than that, it is transparent.
Okay, so each jail has its own static IP address, and getting networking to work inside of the jail is very difficult. It's going to involve like you have a router inside of your own box. You have to set up your DNS server and all that kind of stuff inside of your jail, and you have to have it communicate to the outside world. Then you have to allow FreeBSD as a host to refer things to the outside if you want to make it go with internet. Generally what you'd use a jail for is you'd have your host system be bare bones, just SSH, and then have all your different stuff running in different jails. Like one would be a web server, then over here would be a file system or whatever. And you could keep everything divvied up that way. Or if you wanted to build one of those tiny FreeBSDs, you could just have a jail and then copy the jail over.
So can you run multiple jails at the same time?
Yes.
Is that's why you said it was like the VMs?
Yeah.
You have all
It's kind of like, it's
the whole
not,
cloud of whatever,
yeah.
jails, all in one box.
Yeah, I'm not really even sure what how the proper way to say it is. It's a change root and it's kind of VM-ish. It's somewhat of a useful tool.
Do they have their own memory space, or do they share the same memory?
They share it.
Okay.
You can set up restrictions though, if you want to get into the more detail. But for right now, if you want to set up a jail, the way that's described in the official FreeBSD handbook is obnoxious and unnecessary. You're going to want to install a port called EasyJail in sysutilities.
Go that way.
And then you're going to want to enable EasyJail in your RC config. So that way when you start the computer, your jails will also start. And then you're going to do this you're going to install the template which all the jails are going to build themselves off of. Now if you use the make world build from source type version, you have one of these always laying around. If you use binary, you don't. So you have to fetch a world from binary, and so there's just a simple command to do it. Easy jail-admin install remotely, and then the tag.
There's the remote switch again.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that set up, configured in a dot whatever file, what the remote IP address is?
Not the IP, it's
Or
it's
or
the name of the server.
Yeah.
And that's set up by default.
Okay.
So unless
but you can change it.
you can change
All
it.
right. So
To your own tree, I guess, right?
What?
To your own source or tree.
Right.
Because if you're doing internal stuff, you don't want to.
how many mirrors are there around it where you can get those different?
Well, I know there's at least 15 because I one time arbitrarily picked number 15 and I always use the 15th mirror. As far as the actual number, it changes from time all the time, but it's at least 15. Sorry, I couldn't give a better answer, but all right. Then this is what's going to do is we're going to install ports and the world that we just downloaded, and then we just run the command EasyJail-admin create, and then jails and the name of the jail and the IP address you have reserved for the jail itself. All right, now we're going to talk about PF, which is originally from OpenBSD, and it's the FreeBSD firewall. And this is what the part that I added to the kernel config down here at the bottom to add all this stuff. It's not necessary to build your own kernel to run PF, but it makes it run better and more efficiently, and it makes you cool.
So it's
An extra bonus.
it's like
Yeah.
IP tables.
Yes. So and there's a couple of different firewalls you can have in FreeBSD. Generally, the consensus is that PF is the one we all use, but it handles bandwidth control, redirection, and packet filtering. And then just the next two lines, it's just a sample of what a rule would be. And this particular rule, if you look at it, what it's going to do is it's going to block local IP from external sources. So if someone from the outside world says they're from 192.168. whatever, it's just going to not let that happen. And so if there's the command, you want to start it up. All right. Now we got TCP wrappers. and this is where you can kind of do a bit more of the cooler stuff, and at least in my opinion, and simpler syntax, is basically you can say, okay, I want, okay, on this thing, with this quantity, do this. With the telnet server, all of it, just deny it. We don't want any telnet. SSH, if they're from a good place, we'll allow that. Simple little quick things if you wanted to block various websites wherever, and you're using FreeBSD as a gateway. There's port audit. So you have all your ports. You're not going to want to update these all the time. There are some scripts you can do to update ports, but basically the script will go through, uninstall the port, and then reinstall it in a sequence that will allow it to happen. But if a security vulnerability is found, you probably want to update it. So this is called port audit, and the command is port audit flag A will just audit the ports and see if, and compare with an official list from FreeBSD, and it'll find if there's any vulnerabilities reported. The F forces it to download the latest database of what vulnerabilities are out there. The F, updating the database, happens kind of automatically just by virtue of having port audit installed, but still run it just because why not? And I'm going to close with just some things that I've done in the past that have turned out to be not a good idea. So if you want to start playing with FreeBSD, don't do these things. All right. So when you start FreeBSD, you have the Bourne shell, the SH. You have a cache shell, corn. That's pretty much it. There's not much for shell usage. A lot of people like bash, I like the SH, like I said before. And you can install these with the ports. Do not make these your default root shell. So what will happen is you'll update FreeBSD on a major release, it'll break the port, and now you can't use your system because your shell is broken. And you need your shell to fix your broken system. So just, leave it.
That was you, Bill.
Good thing to think of ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just leave it with something in core. All right. Do not use FreeBSD as a desktop. Right? There's PCBSD for that. There's GhostBSD, which I just saw a few months ago. It looks kind of interesting. Like I said, there's no real way you can do binary updates of ports. And if you've ever truly appreciated how many packages are involved just to get GNOME up and running, and then realize you have to update these by source, and then just pray that you don't have a port break because it's going to be nearly impossible for you to personally fix it, you're going to realize it's not a desktop system. You might be tempted to do it. Don't. All right. Don't use DHCP if you're using jails. And this has to do with because a jail requires a static IP. That's the one thing that's really strict about. You have DHCP and it's assigned IPs. It can be kind of an issue and you have to work around it. If it's possible, don't use it. All right. And if you're going to run major source updates that are going to take forever from an SSH session, use screen and then disconnect from them and connect later. Otherwise, what will happen if you leave the session open, at least I found for so long, is somehow you'll get disconnected for whatever reason, and then you've screwed it up, and you can't get back to it. So use screen so you can rejoin later on. Right. And if you want to set up a cron job, which you might want to do to grab the latest port snap of ports or the latest binary installs, or you might want to fetch source, or if you were actually using the system for something productive, you might want to use it for that. You're going to want to use the uroot if you want to do a root cron job, because if you're using sudo in your cron instructions, or you just sudo I to get into root or whatever you do, it's going to become confused and it's not going to work. So if you want to run something as the root user, use user root in the option. Okay. do not edit PF rules remotely. So you're connected to SSH and you put something wrong that'll block you from connecting to your own server, especially if it's like a little while before you have to give a presentation and show people things, and you have to freak out and try and get a hold of your friend who's hosting the VM for you, and you start screaming. You just don't do that.
It's the great thing about firewalls. Sometimes when they do what you want them to do, they stop letting you in.
Yep.
And then you first are excited that it works better, but then you realize that there's nothing you can do because you can't get back in.
Right. So there's also the port snap update, which will you go port snap fetch will grab the compressed version of the latest ports tree, and then update will apply those updates. If you want to set up a cron job, don't have it do a port snap update, because you do not want to update a port in the middle of it using that port. And it does take several hours for some of the larger ports to install, so you want to do the update when you know you're not currently using the ports tree, because you might screw something up. And there's going to be a lot of those configuration files in user share examples. And you might think it'd be nice just to go in there, make your changes, and then point everything to those user share examples. Don't edit those files. Just copy them to your home directory or somewhere else and use the files there, so you can then still have your examples.
Oh, yes.
All right. And that brings us to the end of this longer than I expected presentation.
It always is when you're planning. You're like, that'll take 2 minutes. You're like, oh goodness, I've been talking for half an hour.
You were going to say something.
Okay.
Before you say anything,
Yes.
the police wouldn't do this. They would let you say something first. No, what I'm saying, I found something here about this learnfreenes.com,
Okay.
and they said they've got this guy, Olivier Cochard-Labey. He was the founder of this free NAS thing.
Yeah.
He says don't use this BSD-RP for firewalling, but use monowall and PFSense. So evidently he wants to make this is the router, I guess, that he's intending to this free NAS.
Okay.
Olivier Cochard-Labey, the reason why he said that is because a lot of people want their appliances to do everything, and having the place in which all of your storage is being served up to your entire network also be the appliance that keeps everybody from coming into the network is not necessarily the best idea. So,
Right.
So there are a lot of people that are saying, okay, I have this box that's doing a lot of cool things. Can it also filter network traffic for me? And his official response was, it's a bad idea. Don't do it. And so it's not necessarily a limitation of FreeBSD per se, more just good design sense, and don't open up shares on a machine that you're trying to keep people out of. Or,
Okay.
well, on the machine that is the gateway to the rest of your
Well, okay,
network.
it could be that, but it could also just be that he's trying to maximize or make this most efficient router out of this BSD-RP. But okay, and Cisco's got that. What's the Cisco firewall? I forget the name of it. But okay, I guess it's better to have them on separate platforms or separate VMs. But this monowall and PFSense, has anybody used those as firewalls? Or have you?
Well, PFSense is just a minimal FreeBSD install with PF installed and set up.
And there's one of the minimal. Okay.
Right.
Right. Okay, that's one of them.
I think I have a friend who uses monowall.
Okay. What I'd like to do, I don't know if anybody else is interested, but there's big money in MPLS. There's a lot of Cisco work on that. But I'd like to find a distribution like Viata or this BSD-RP but it doesn't look like it's got MPLS. He's got OSPF version 2 and 3 and RIP-NG and BGP, but I don't see MPLS, and I've been looking for that on Google. But I mean, if anybody's interested in that, in MPLS, running these big core routers with this particular routing protocol, I'd like to talk with you.
Okay, what was that Java thing you were?
Glassfish, it would have been, and I've been Googling for that too. And they did have some stuff in there in 2007, 2008. I haven't found anything recent.
Glassfish, was that a window? The desktop, I think, or was it?
It's an
I
app
think
server.
you're thinking Blowfish.
It's like an application,
Okay.
but Sun's version.
the Java EE application server, which includes Apache.
What exactly is MPLS?
I forget, it's something like multi-protocol label
Switching?
It's another way of network traffic analysis
Well,
or
right, but
something.
They made it so that there were all these layer 2 in the OSI model. There were all these layer 2 protocols, ATM and who knows what else, and they needed a routing protocol that would handle all the layer 2, and I think that's where it got started. I don't know what's happening with it now. I certainly would like to know, and I'm attracted to that kind of
It sounded to me like what they're doing is they just kind of added kind of almost a half a layer above the IP,
It's actually kind of between the layer 3 and layer 2.
Yeah,
If I'm thinking about
so
that.
they can prioritize the packets, so they have the extra information with the thing, so they can prioritize the stuff and stuff like that.
Right.
And without really start with the ATM, is like a whole other, completely another layer in there.
Right, that's your layer, that's definitely layer 2 ATM. But the thing about this is this BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, they've been running that in these big, these huge tier 1 ISP cores. They've been running BGP in there, but they found that they can run this MPLS much more efficiently. It's just that they don't have the people who can handle it.
Yeah, I think there's less overhead in it, but the thing is that I remember I had a cousin who was giving me the crash course in ATM, like in about a half an hour or so, because he built a router, but he says that there's almost like a 30% overhead in the ATM, because the packets are so tiny.
Yeah. Well, and that reminds me of another thing that I think MPLS you can jump right from MPLS down into the to the layer 1, the photonics. I think you can run right over Sonnet. I'm not sure about that. There may be some other protocols in between there, but it's very powerful.
Yeah.
And the big core tier 1 system operators, they're doing this. They just don't have enough people that can do it. I'd like to get it.
Well, it sounded good. Yeah, I did see a thing. It's because I was kind of seeing all these routers around, which there's a bunch of them are pretty inexpensive even.
Yeah, well, I'll post something. Maybe if there's interest, we could talk about Viata with MPLS, or this free NAS BSDRP, BSD Router Project, I think it stands for. Later, I'll post a message to the list.
Oh, and I forgot to mention one other thing. You can install Linux apps on FreeBSD. You enable Linux in the RC config file, and then you go into ports and you can put in various distributions of Linux. Like I put Fedora 10 running on here in the background, so if I found like a Skype RPM and they don't have Skype for FreeBSD, I can still install it with Yum.
Oh, that's
Running
nice.
it, what, in a jail?
No, it's a compatibility layer, like wine.
Oh,
Kind of like that.
okay.
Only more effective because they're pretty much the same. Anyway, there's what my RC config file looks like. You can kind of just see what it does.
What was that? Ivan talked about something like that in Solaris or Open Solaris, where you would, there were two ways.
There's new for Linux, there's an ABI, I think it's called ABI now or something like that. We used to run, SCO type stuff that
That
worked.
just turns on the ability to install
And then you
a
install whatever.
yeah, and it's under emulate, and you can they don't have anything like really super
Have you
current.
played around with KVL?
Not yet.
I just
The
took
kernel
the rest of
virtual
it and
module
put
is really
that, and
nice.
it doesn't
It's
really
like
do anything. It just sits in the background.
running
Should you want to install like
another
Flash player or
Kernel, you can run
Skype?
Windows in.
They had some
in
Java
Linux.
stuff,
It's
which was the
really nice.
Linux version.
Tumble is.
Oh, it's pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
I tried Excellent too because I had the old laptop. It installed on the EDU version.
Well, that it here, kill the camera?
Oh, that thing was still running?
Oh, yeah.